everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm showing the second part of creating these fairy cards. And so this is the Copic coloring video. I'm going to go through the process that I did to color the fairies and all of the marker colors I used. So I have my fairies all stamped out. If you watched my first video making the card, you would have seen that process, and I'll link it down below and at the end of this video if you want to check it out. So I'm starting with coloring the fairies, and this video is going to show all of my process. No time lapses, no speed ups, no cutouts. Everything is real time for coloring each of the elements. I'm not going to show you all 4 of each because they're the same. I'm making 4 versions of this card, but I will show you one of each of the fairies. So I've started with my base color, just laying that down, the skin tone E11, and then I'm coming in with E13 and just creating a shadow underneath the hairline and along the tops of the legs and the tops of the arms. I've come in with R22 and just put 2 little circle dots for each of the cheeks. And now I'm going to work on the hair color next. I'm going to talk about the hair a little bit more in depth because that is the more complicated part of the coloring. All of the information I give about coloring the hair will apply to all 4 fairies. They're all the basic same techniques, just using different color combinations. So when I create the fairy hair, I typically like to have at least 3 colors, sometimes 4 or 5, depending on the color that I'm making, the color of hair. So for the blonde hair, it's a basic coloring, so I'm doing 3. And so I'm starting with a Y11, putting the lightest color down first, and then working up each layer of the darker colors until I have the hair completely colored. There's 2 things I always keep in mind when I'm creating fairy hair. I start at the top of the head where I feel that the hairline would be, and so where the part in the hair would be. And so I like to color away from that part line and keep that part line white. That's the first thing I do. The second thing I always do is try to create a highlight line. This is usually around the middle of the head. And so if you're looking at the hair top to bottom, then I color from the top down halfway and then from the bottom up halfway. And so that space in the middle where they meet, I try to leave a little gap to create a little bit of a highlight and try not to touch the strokes together too much there. It doesn't matter as much with the lighter colors, but when you get into the darker colors, I try to make every layer I make a little bit shorter on the hair wisps as I go. So it creates more of that white line. So with this fairy hair, what I did is I started with Y11, and so I put my base down. I started at the top of the hair and created what I felt would be the part in her hair where I felt that that would lay on her head. And then using that as my base, just working away from that line, doing light flicks of my brush around the curvature of the head halfway down the hair. And then I did the exact same thing working from the bottom of her hair, the tips there, near her ears, just flicking up towards the middle of her hair and creating that natural highlight line, just leaving that space. And then I come in with my second color and do the exact same application, just making my flicks a little bit shorter. And then with my third color, which is my darkest color, I do the exact same thing again and making those flicks even shorter so that I create that shadow at the very top and the very bottom of the hair. And so that's what gives the hair look on the fairies. That's what I use. And so going ahead with the other colorings, I'll walk you through those as well as we see them on screen. So again, I'm doing the skin tone the exact same way, just very basic. The fairies aren't very big, so there's not a lot of room to do too much. I like to lay down my base color and then a shadow color under the hairline and along the tops of the arms and the tops of the legs, and then putting in a little dab of color for the cheeks. And so with this fairy, this is about the only one that doesn't really have a natural part line in her drawing of her hair. So I do her as a full head of hair with no part line. So instead of working at the top away from that part line, I work at the top away from the base of her bun. So starting at the very top center of her head, I just do my light flicks of my marker in a curvature pattern starting at the very top center and then flicking away and curving as I go across the top of her hair. And only going halfway down her hair to leave that natural highlight across the middle, and then doing the same thing from the bottom of the hair as we did on the previous fairy, just flicking from the base up halfway, doing halfway strokes, creating that natural highlight across the center. And then as I come in with my colors, the more I layer, the shorter my flicks get. So it creates a shadow near the very top of the hair and the very bottom of the hair. And so you can see how as these layers come in, they start to form that 3D effect. And you always want to make sure that your flicks of your brush match the curvature of her hair. Otherwise, if they're just straight flicks, then her hair is going to look flat and you're not going to get that 3D look that you want. And so that natural highlight does really help as well. Leaving a little bit of white of the paper just makes it seem that much more realistic. Now for the dark hair, the brunette, I used a combination of 4 colors. This one, I really wanted the shadows and the very tops and bottoms of the hair to be really, really intense. And so I did come in with a 4th color at the end, that E79, which is a very dark brown, and just doing it ever so slightly along the edges of the hairline at the top and bottom, just to create that extra shadow. I felt really gave it that extra oomph that it needed. And so for the buns of the fairy hair, there's nothing really complicated there. I do the same layering, those 3 or 4 colors that I put into the main part of the hair, I put into her bun as well. I usually just dot my brush across the top of it, and because it's really hard to do details. So as long as I can see those 4 or 3 colors represented the same in that space as in her hair, then I find that it blends the same, and it's with your eye you don't really see the difference. Now when I'm doing the dresses, those are pretty simple too. I like to keep them very basic, so I put down my base color. I always like to work lightest to darkest. And so I put the base color down, and then while that color is still wet on the page, I like to come in and draw that shadow next. And so what will happen is if the marker ink is still a little bit wet, then those colors start to blend together and you don't have to work as hard to get them to blend. And so when you come in again, after you've put down your base color and then you've put down your shadow, when you come back in with your base color to blend the edge where the shadow and the base meet, it's already started to blend for you, so you just have to add a little bit of that base again to blend that edge. So it makes it super easy that way. And so here I'm coloring my 3rd fairy hair, and this one does have that natural part line sort of to the right side of her head looking at her. It's on her left side, our right side. And so again, just doing light flicks with my brush halfway down from the top at the center and the bottom up towards the center of the horizontal line of her hair, and just creating every layer the same, making the flicks shorter with every layer that I add and going lightest to darkest. And so I'll put all these colors in the description below if you want to check them out, and I'll list them all according to whatever groups I use them in. So I'll put all the blonde colors together and all the brunette colors and all the dress colors. So with the dresses, I'm just laying down my first application of the lightest color of the dress, and then I'm going to come in with my shadow here. So there's always going to be a shadow underneath the neck and underneath the arm, and I'm keeping my shadow to the right side, so along the back of her dress. And then coming in with my base color, I just blended the edges a little bit, and it took nothing at all to get those colors to blend because the ink is all wet and already doing its thing on the paper. Now for the fairy wings themselves, I'm just using a very light color. For this one, I'm using Y11, and just lightly doing flicks the same as I would the hair with the wings. And so going halfway up the wings and out from the base of the body towards the tip of the wings, and just doing little light flicks halfway, about 50% of the way, on each wing piece. So now I'm getting ready to do my last fairy and just getting the skin tone laid down, and then I'll work on the hair next. And as long as I find that I get that shadow color laid down really quickly after putting my base color, I don't have to do much blending to get those colors to blend. Sometimes I just touch the edge with the base color, as I mentioned, but they blend really nicely, especially if you're using marker-friendly paper. So now I'm doing the hair again and putting down my base color first. And you can see that I'm working from the top halfway down and then from the bottom of the hair halfway up, leaving that natural highlight line. And then just with every layer, making my flicks just a little bit shorter so they're not covering up the last layer that I put down on the hair. And so this one is, I find the fairies that have the natural part line are really a lot easier to color because you can really see that division between the hair, so that there's that big main piece of hair and then that tinier piece on the right side. And so it's easier to color those in separate blocks than trying to blend them all together. So just coming in with that E79, doing the last touch-ups just to make those shadows really, really dark, just to give that extra 3D look. I find that that just gives just the added intensity it needs to give it just the more pop that it needs, that nice curvature and 3D element. And I often find when I'm coloring, I get so involved with coloring the hair, I forget to color the bun most times. But then I have to come back and just dab some of those colors back in. If there is room on the bun, I'll flick the brush a little bit to try and create some hairlines. But most of the time, it's just a tiny little dab or just a touch of the marker. It doesn't take very much at all. So now for coloring the shadows on the fairies, I did it pretty simple for these. Normally, I would pick a constant point of light, and it would be either the top right or the top left, and then the shadow would come up from the opposite. So if my point of light was in the top left, my shadows would be coming up from the bottom right. For the fairies, keeping it very simple, I just did the same type of shadows always under the neck and then along the back where the wings meet. And in this case, the fairies front faced, so I've done the shadow along the right side just to create that 3D look. And I felt that this was the busiest part that would create the most shadow, so it made the most sense there. And then adding the final touch of the wings, I'd like to think that the wings are delicate and transparent, so there wouldn't be too much color there at all, just light yellow, the lightest color that you can find. So now I'm ready to pop these out. I'm just going to put my dies over top and put some post-it tape down to hold those in place and run them through my Sizzix machine for popping out the dies. So here's the assembly of my card. If you're curious, this is what the final result looked like. This is how I put it together. And I was so happy with the fairies and the coloring. I just loved how it all came together. And I put a little glitter on the wings as well, just to add a little bit more dimension, because fairies need glitter. So I'll link this video for making the card if you want to see that process if you haven't already. But otherwise, here's a look at the finished product. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little bit different. I thought it would help to separate out the coloring, and especially because it is a little more involved. So hopefully I've done an okay job of explaining what the process is. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified as I post more videos to my channel. And I'll post the other video too, so you can take a look at that if you're interested. Thanks so much for watching.